The blizzard had been raging for 3 days on the frozen planet of Kithra, but the white dragons didn't mind the cold. Their thick, pearl-colored scales reflected the swirling snow, making them nearly invisible against the icy landscape. The pack of 12 adult dragons huddled together in their mountain cave, their massive bodies creating a protective circle around the empty nesting ground at the center. Zareth, the pack leader, lifted his great horned head and released a low, mournful cry that echoed through the cavern. The sound was answered by 11 other voices, each one heavy with grief. For weeks now they had been singing the song of loss, this ancient ritual of mourning that their species had practiced for thousands of years. The nesting ground should have been filled with the excited chirping of newly hatched younglings. Instead, it held only broken eggshells and painful memories. 23 eggs had been laid during the spring season. 23 future members of their pack, each one carefully tended and protected. But the fever sickness had come in the night, a mysterious plague that had swept through their territory like wildfire. Lisa, Zareth's mate, pressed her snout against his neck. Her usually bright silver eyes were dull with sorrow. "The wind carries strange scents today," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the howling storm outside. "Something moves in the valley below." Zareth's nostrils flared as he tested the air. She was right. Mixed with the familiar smells of snow and ice was something else, something warm and alien. It didn't smell like the metallic ships that sometimes crossed their skies, nor did it carry the chemical stench of the mining robots that had tried to invade their territory years ago. This scent was organic, living but unlike anything in their world. Kyle, the youngest adult in the pack, raised his head from where he had been resting. His white scales were marked with pale blue patterns that showed his youth. "Should we investigate, pack leader?" The scent grows stronger. The other dragons stirred, their massive forms shifting in the cave. They were all curious but also wary. Their species had learned long ago that strange visitors rarely brought good news. The last outsiders to visit their world had been researchers from the Galactic Council, studying their primitive culture. Those scientists had left behind nothing but disruption and disease. Zareth stood slowly, his enormous body unfolding to its full height. At nearly 40 feet long from nose to tail tip, he was an impressive sight. His wings, currently folded against his back, could span almost 60 feet when fully extended. The ridge of spines along his back glowed with a soft inner light that all dragons possessed when they felt strong emotions. "Vex, Dorn, come with me," he commanded, naming 2 of his most trusted hunters. "The rest of the pack stays here. If this is another threat to our territory, we will handle it swiftly." The 3 dragons moved to the cave entrance, their claws clicking against the stone floor. The storm had begun to weaken, but snow still fell in thick curtains across the mountainside. Zareth spread his wings and launched himself into the air, followed closely by his companions. Flying through a blizzard was challenging even for creatures born to these conditions. The wind tried to throw them off course, and the snow made it difficult to see more than a few yards ahead. But dragons had other senses beyond sight. They could feel the thermal currents rising from the valley, sense the magnetic fields of the planet, and most importantly, track that strange new scent. As they descended toward the source, Zareth's sharp eyes began to make out a dark shape moving through the snow. It was small, much smaller than any of the native creatures on Kithara. It moved on 2 legs like some of the species they had encountered from other worlds, but its form was different, more compact, more sturdy. The creature had fallen to its knees in a small clearing, its dark clothing stark against the white landscape. It wasn't moving much now, and Zareth could sense its life force growing weaker. Whatever it was dying in their frozen world. "It's not one of the council species," Vex observed, hovering nearby. Her keen eyes could pick out details that escaped the others. "Look at its face covering. That's not standard exploration gear." Dorn, the largest of the 3 dragons, rumbled his disapproval. "It could be a trap. Remember what happened to the mountain packs in the eastern ranges? The metal creatures came disguised as harmless visitors." But Zareth was studying the figure more carefully. Something about its posture, the way it had collapsed in the snow, reminded him of his own younglings when they were sick. There was vulnerability here, not threat. And the scent it carried was warm, almost comforting in a way he couldn't explain. The creature raised its head slightly, and for a moment, their eyes met across the swirling snow. Even from this distance, Zareth could see that they were different from any species he knew. Not the large, dark eyes of the researchers, not the compound visual organs of the insect-like traders. These eyes were smaller, but they held something that made the dragon pack leader pause: intelligence, pain, and something else that took him a moment to recognize: hope. The creature was looking at them not with fear, but with a desperate kind of relief, as if their presence meant salvation rather than doom. It raised one of its appendages, what might have been an arm, in a gesture that seemed like a greeting or a plea for help. Zareth made his decision quickly. We take it back to the cave. If it's dying anyway, it poses no threat. And if it lives... He paused, not sure why he was even considering this. If it lives, perhaps we can learn what brought it to our world. The 3 dragons landed in the clearing, their massive forms surrounding the small figure. Up close, they could see that it was even smaller than they had thought, no bigger than one of their own younglings. Its coverings were thick but inadequate for their world's harsh climate. Ice had formed on the fabric, and the creature was shivering violently. Zareth approached slowly, mindful of his size. He had learned from painful experience that smaller creatures could be easily injured by a dragon's casual movements. The being didn't flee or try to attack. Instead, it looked up at him with those strange eyes and spoke in a voice barely audible above the wind. The words were in no language Zareth recognized, but the tone was unmistakable. It was asking for help. Without another word, the pack leader carefully grasped the creature in his talons, being as gentle as possible with his deadly claws. The being went limp either from exhaustion or unconsciousness. As they rose into the air, heading back to their cave, Zareth found himself wondering what they had just committed themselves to. In his grief over the lost hatchlings, he had acted on instinct rather than logic. But something told him this decision would change everything for his pack. The cave erupted in startled roars when Zareth returned carrying the unconscious creature. Dragons scattered to the far walls, their neck frills flaring with alarm colors. Some of the younger adults bared their fangs, ready to defend the pack from this unknown threat. "Have you lost your mind?" snarled Thyra, an older female whose mate had been among the eggs that died. Her silver scales were tinged with red, showing her anger. "You bring a stranger into our sacred space, into the place where our young should have lived?" Zareth landed gently near the cave's center, still holding the small being in his talons. "Look at it, Thyra, really look. Does this seem like a threat to you?" The pack gradually moved closer, their curiosity overcoming their caution. The creature was even smaller than they had imagined, barely the size of a dragon hatchling. Its covering was wet from melted snow, and its skin was pale, almost white like their own scales. But it was the wrong kind of white. Not the healthy pearl color of dragonhide, but the sickly pallor of something drained of warmth. Lisa approached first, her maternal instincts overriding her fear. "It's so small," she whispered. "And cold." "Feel how cold it is, Zareth." The pack leader nodded grimly. He could sense the creature's failing life force, the way its internal heat was slowly ebbing away. Whatever this being was, it wouldn't survive much longer without help. "We should let it die and remove the body," Dorn suggested, though his tone lacked conviction. "It doesn't belong here." "No," said a voice from the back of the cave. Everyone turned to see Nyx, the pack's eldest member, hobbling forward on legs stiff with age. Her scales had lost their luster years ago, but her mind remained sharp. "Don't you see what this is? What this could mean?" The other dragons waited respectfully as she approached. Nyx was their memory keeper, the one who held the old stories and ancient wisdom of their kind. "In the old tales," she began, her voice carrying the weight of centuries, "there are stories of times when the universe would send signs to those who suffered great loss. Gifts that came in unexpected forms." Thyra snorted dismissively. "This is no gift, Elder. This is a burden we don't need." But Nyx ignored her, studying the unconscious creature with eyes that had seen many things. "Look at its coloring, my pack. White, like us. It came during the time of our mourning, when we needed hope most. And see how it breathes? The rhythm is similar to our own hatchlings." Zareth felt something stir in his chest, an emotion he hadn't experienced since the eggs had died. Could the old one be right? Was there more to this stranger's arrival than chance? The creature stirred weakly in his grasp, its eyes fluttering open. They were a strange blue color, like the deep ice that never melted. When they focused on the gathered dragons, there was no fear in them. Instead, the being made soft sounds that almost resembled the comforting noises dragon parents made to their young. It's trying to communicate, Vex observed. She had always been the most perceptive of the pack. Listen to the tone patterns. They're soothing, like a lullaby. Lysa moved closer, her massive head lowering until she was nearly touching the small being. To everyone's surprise, the creature reached out with one of its limbs and touched her snout. The contact was gentle, reverent, like the way a youngster might touch its parent. The effect on Lysa was immediate. Her grieving song, which had been constant for weeks, suddenly stopped. Her eyes widened as she felt something she thought was gone forever, the warm comfort of a young life seeking her protection. By the ancient fires, she breathed. It wants to be cared for. It's asking us to keep it safe. The revelation sent ripples of shock through the pack. Dragons were not known for their kindness to other species. They were hunters, predators at the top of their world's food chain. Yet here was a creature that looked at them without fear, that sought their protection instead of running from their power. Kale, the youngest adult, crept closer. What do we call it? It's not like any creature in our knowledge songs. The being seemed to hear him and made more soft sounds. This time one of the sounds was repeated several times with what seemed like emphasis. Human, it said clearly, pointing to itself. Human, Zareth repeated slowly, testing the strange word. You are called human. The creature, the human, nodded weakly and pointed to itself again. Then it made another sound that might have been a name, but the dragons couldn't quite understand it. Nyx settled herself nearby, her ancient eyes studying the human with growing interest. In the oldest stories, there were tales of a species called humans. They were said to be small but fierce, capable of great love and terrible anger. They could survive in places that would kill other beings, and they had a gift for bringing out the best in those around them. Those are just stories, Elder, Dorn protested. Myths from the dawn times. Perhaps, Nyx acknowledged. But consider this, our world is dying slowly. The fever sickness came from somewhere, brought by visitors who didn't understand the delicate balance of our ecosystem. Our birth rates have been dropping for generations. When was the last time any pack had a successful hatching? The question hung heavy in the air. Every dragon knew the answer. It had been over 3 years since any pack had successfully raised young to adulthood. The fever sickness was just the latest in a series of disasters that had plagued their species. What are you suggesting? Zareth asked, though part of him already suspected where the Elder's thoughts were leading. I'm suggesting that perhaps this human's arrival is not coincidence. Perhaps it's here for a reason we don't yet understand. Nyx gestured toward the empty nesting ground with one clawed wing. We have lost our future. Our young are gone, and we spend our days singing songs of grief. But what if instead of mourning what we've lost, we could protect what we've found? The human had been listening to their conversation, and though it clearly didn't understand their language, it seemed to sense the importance of the moment. It struggled to sit up in Zareth's gentle grasp, then reached into its coverings and pulled out a small object. It was a picture, flat and rectangular, showing images of small beings that looked like smaller versions of itself. The human held it carefully, and its eyes filled with moisture that the dragons gradually realized were tears. The message was clear without words. This creature had also lost its young. Lysa made a soft keening sound, the dragon equivalent of sympathy. She had recognized a fellow parent in grief. It understands, she whispered. It knows what we're feeling. The human tucked the picture away and looked around at the assembled dragons. Then, to their amazement, it began to make sounds that were eerily similar to their own mourning song. The melody was different, but the emotion behind it was unmistakable. This small being was sharing their grief, honoring their loss in the only way it could. One by one, the other dragons began to join in, their voices blending with the humans' strange but heartfelt lament. For the first time in weeks, their song of mourning became something else, a song of shared understanding, of comfort found in unexpected places. When the song ended, the cave was silent except for the wind outside. The human had exhausted itself with the effort and was breathing heavily, its life force flickering like a candle in the wind. We need to warm it, Lysa said urgently. It's dying from the cold. Without waiting for permission, she carefully took the human from Zareth and nestled it against her warm belly, using her wing to create a protective shelter. The other dragons watched in fascination as the small being immediately relaxed, its breathing becoming steadier. The old nesting chamber, Nyx suggested. It still holds heat from the thermal vents. We could make it comfortable there. As the pack began to discuss the practical matters of keeping their unexpected guest alive, none of them noticed the subtle changes already beginning to take place. The constant atmosphere of grief that had filled their cave was lifting, replaced by something they hadn't felt in a long time: purpose. The thermal chamber had not been used since the eggs were destroyed, but the dragons worked through the night to make it suitable for their strange guest. Kale and 2 others cleared away the broken shells with reverent care, while Vex used her flame breath to warm the stone walls. By dawn, the chamber glowed with gentle heat, perfect for a creature that seemed so vulnerable to cold. The human had slept for 18 hours straight, nestled against Lysa's warm belly. When it finally stirred, the dragons were amazed by the transformation. The sickly pallor had been replaced by a healthier pink color, and its strange blue eyes were alert and curious. Mara, the human said clearly, pointing to itself. After several repetitions, the dragons understood this was its name. Mara, Zareth repeated, tasting the foreign syllables. Human Mara. Mara nodded enthusiastically, then began pointing to each dragon in turn, making questioning sounds. It wanted to know their names. This began a fascinating process of communication. Dragons had never tried to teach their language to another species before, but Mara proved to be a surprisingly quick learner. Within days, it could pronounce basic dragon names and understood simple concepts. More importantly, Mara seemed genuinely interested in everything about dragon culture. It watched their daily routines with intense curiosity, asked questions through gestures and broken words, and even attempted to participate in their rituals. The breakthrough came during the evening song. For generations, dragons had gathered each sunset to sing together, sharing news and strengthening pack bonds. Since the loss of their young, these songs had become laments of sorrow. But when Mara joined them, something changed. The human couldn't reproduce their complex vocalizations, but it found ways to contribute. Sometimes it clapped its hands in rhythm. Sometimes it hummed along in its own voice. Most remarkably, it began to add new elements, gestures and movements that enhanced the emotional impact of their songs. Look, Vex whispered to Zareth one evening as they watched Mara directing the younger dragons in a new harmony pattern. It's teaching us things we never knew about our own music. The pack leader nodded, equally amazed. In just 2 weeks, the human had transformed their evening gatherings from morning rituals into something approaching celebration. The songs still honored their lost young, but now they also spoke of hope, of new beginnings, of the unexpected gift they had received. The changes went beyond music. Mara had an endless curiosity about how things worked. It studied their hunting techniques, their food preparation, their sleeping arrangements. But unlike the researchers who had visited years before, Mara wasn't taking notes to report to others. It was learning because it wanted to be part of their world. "Watch this," Kyle said excitedly one morning, leading the pack to where Mara was working near the cave entrance. The human had somehow constructed a series of reflective surfaces that directed sunlight deep into the cave system, warming chambers that had always been cold and dark. How does it think of these things? Dorn wondered aloud. Despite his initial resistance, the large dragon had become one of Mara's most devoted protectors. Nyx provided insight from her vast store of knowledge. The old stories speak of human creativity. They say this species has a gift for seeing possibilities that others miss. They look at the same world we see but imagine ways to make it better. This proved prophetic when Mara began working on what the dragons initially thought was just play. The human had been studying the broken eggshells with intense concentration, examining them with tools made from cave crystals. When asked what it was doing, Mara's limited dragon vocabulary failed, so it resorted to drawings. The pictures showed eggs, but also strange symbols and diagrams that meant nothing to the dragons. Mara grew frustrated trying to explain, often pointing to the thermal vents, then to the drawings, then to itself. The revelation came when Thyra fell ill. The older female had been the most resistant to accepting Mara, but age and grief had weakened her immune system. She developed the same fever symptoms that had killed their eggs, and the pack feared they were about to lose another member. Mara took one look at the sick dragon and disappeared into the lower caves. It returned hours later carrying plants that none of the dragons recognized, vegetation from the deep thermal valleys that they had never bothered to explore. Working with desperate efficiency, The human prepared a mixture using techniques that seemed to involve precise measurements and controlled heating. When Thyra drank the strange concoction, her fever broke within hours. Impossible, Vex breathed. That sickness has killed everything it touches for months. But Mara wasn't finished. Over the following days, it prepared more of the medicine and began treating the other dragons. Not for the fever. None of them were sick, but for older ailments they had learned to live with. Dorn's arthritis improved dramatically. Kale's occasional digestive problems disappeared entirely. Most remarkably, Mara began working on something even more ambitious. The human had been studying the dragon reproductive cycle, learning about their mating rituals, their nesting habits, their egg incubation requirements. Through careful observation and endless questions, it had identified what the dragons themselves had missed. The fever sickness hadn't come from outside. It had been triggered by subtle changes in their environment, changes caused by the mining operations on the far side of their territory. Trace chemicals in the water supply had disrupted the delicate biochemistry needed for successful hatching. Mara couldn't explain this in dragon language, but it could demonstrate solutions. Working with materials found in the deep caves, it constructed filtration systems that cleaned their water supply. It identified which thermal vents produced the cleanest air and redirected airflow through the nesting chambers. Most importantly, it began preparing something special in the thermal chamber where it lived. "What is that human doing?" Lysa asked one morning, watching Mara carefully arrange crystals and minerals in complex patterns around the chamber. Zareth had been wondering the same thing. The human worked with the intensity of someone solving a vital puzzle, constantly checking the temperature, adjusting the crystal arrangements, testing the air quality with methods the dragons didn't understand. "I think," Nyx said slowly, "it's preparing for something important, something that has to do with new life." The elder's words proved prescient when Mara finally managed to communicate its intentions. Using a combination of broken dragon speech, gestures, and drawings, the human explained that the next mating season was only months away. If the dragons were willing to try again, Mara believed it could create conditions that would allow successful hatching. The prospect both thrilled and terrified the pack. The loss of their previous clutch had been devastating. Could they risk going through that pain again? But as they watched Mara work with tireless dedication, preparing safeguards they had never imagined, hope began to stir in their hearts. This small being had already accomplished miracles. Perhaps it could accomplish one more. "The ancient stories speak of humans as bringers of change," Nyx observed. "But they never mentioned how much courage it would take to accept that change." Zareth looked around at his pack, at Lysa, who sang again with joy, at Kale, whose youthful enthusiasm had returned, at even Thyra, who now watched Mara with protective affection. The human had given them something more precious than medicine or comfort. It had given them back their future. The pack leader made his decision. "We try again," he announced. "When the season comes, we mate and nest again. And this time we have a guardian who understands what our young need to survive." Mara looked up from its work, somehow understanding the significance of the moment. The human smiled, a strange expression that showed its small white teeth, and returned to its preparations with renewed energy. Winter was ending, and spring would bring new possibilities. Spring arrived early on Kythera that year, bringing with it the ancient stirrings that had driven dragon reproduction for millennia. The pack felt the change in their blood, the deep instinctual pull toward mating and nesting. But this season was different from any in their history, because they had Mara. The human had spent the winter months transforming their cave system into something unprecedented. The thermal chamber now maintained perfect temperature and humidity levels through an ingenious system of crystal lenses and redirected airflow. Water sources had been purified through layers of filtering stones. Even the lighting had been carefully adjusted to match the natural rhythms that dragon embryos needed. "It's like the nesting chambers in the ancient songs," Lysa marveled, running her claws gently over surfaces that Mara had polished to mirror smoothness. "The perfect caves where dragons once raised hundreds of young." Mara beamed at the praise, though its attention remained focused on a series of complex measurements. The human had developed its own system for monitoring conditions, using tools crafted from cave materials and methods that seemed almost magical to the dragons. The first mating flights began in early spring. Zareth and Lysa performed the traditional aerial dance that had bonded dragon pairs for generations, but this time, they had an audience. Mara watched from a safe position on a mountain ledge, taking notes and making sketches that none of the dragons understood. "Why does it study everything so carefully?" Dorn asked during one of their evening gatherings. Nyx, now completely fascinated by their human guest, offered her theory. "I believe Mara sees patterns that we miss. Dragons have always done things the way our ancestors did them, but perhaps there are better ways." This proved true when Mara made its first major intervention in the reproductive process. Traditionally, dragon females chose their nesting sites based on instinct and territorial claims, but Mara had spent months analyzing every potential location in their territory, measuring thermal output, testing soil composition, checking for optimal wind patterns. When Lysa felt ready to lay her eggs, Mara guided her to a spot that none of the dragons would have chosen naturally, a small chamber deep in the cave system that the human had spent weeks preparing. The location felt wrong to dragon instincts, too sheltered and warm, but Lysa trusted the small being that had already saved Thyra's life. The first egg was laid on the spring equinox, a perfect white oval the size of Mara's head. The human immediately began its monitoring routine, checking temperature gradients and air circulation with instruments it had crafted specifically for this purpose. Over the following weeks, 5 more eggs joined the first. Each was carefully positioned according to Mara's calculations, with precise spacing and orientation that differed from traditional dragon methods. The other pack members watched nervously as their ancient practices were replaced by human innovation. What if it's wrong? Thyra worried, voicing the fear they all shared. What if we lose them again? But Mara's confidence never wavered. The human worked tirelessly, adjusting conditions with subtle precision, monitoring the developing embryos with techniques that seemed to border on magic. It had somehow learned to sense the life force within each egg, tracking the growth and health of the unborn dragons. 3 weeks into the incubation period, their faith was rewarded with the first signs of success. Traditional dragon eggs showed little change during early development, but Mara's careful monitoring revealed strong, steady growth in all 6 embryos. "They're bigger than they should be at this stage," Vex observed, comparing measurements to the ancient breeding records, "and their life signs are much stronger." Mara nodded enthusiastically, pointing to its various instruments and chattering in rapid human speech that the dragons were gradually learning to understand. The improvements weren't accidental. They were the result of optimal conditions that dragon instincts had never been able to achieve. As the weeks passed, other pack members began their own nesting attempts. Guided by Mara's expertise, they prepared chambers with unprecedented care. The human created individual monitoring systems for each clutch, teaching the dragons how to read the instruments and make minor adjustments. The transformation in the pack was remarkable. Instead of simply waiting and hoping as their ancestors had done, they became active participants in nurturing their young. Mara taught them which plants to gather for optimal nutrition during egg laying, how to recognize early warning signs of problems, how to create microclimates that supported healthy development. But the human's most important contribution came during the 7th week of incubation. When the first crisis struck, Kale's mate, a young female named Sarah, had laid 4 eggs in a carefully prepared chamber. Everything had been progressing normally until Mara's instruments detected subtle changes in one embryo's development. The human became agitated, checking and rechecking its measurements, clearly indicating that something was wrong. Through gestures and broken dragon speech, Mara explained that one egg was showing signs of the same biochemical imbalance that had killed their previous clutch. The fever sickness was trying to return. Traditional dragon medicine had no treatment for this condition. Their only option had always been to watch helplessly as the sickness spread from egg to egg until entire clutches died. But Mara had been preparing for this possibility. Working with desperate efficiency, the human prepared a treatment using the same thermal plants it had used to cure Thyra. But this application was far more complex, requiring precise timing and careful application methods that Mara had developed through months of research. The treatment involved creating a specialized atmosphere around the affected egg, using vaporized plant extracts and controlled temperature variations. Mara worked for 3 days straight, monitoring the embryo's response and adjusting the treatment as needed. The pack watched in tense silence as their small guardian fought to save their future. Dragons who had initially questioned Mara's strange methods now prayed to their ancient spirits for the human's success. On the fourth day, Mara's instruments showed a dramatic change. The embryo's life signs strengthened, the biochemical imbalance corrected itself, and healthy development resumed. The human had not only saved one egg, it had developed a cure for the plague that had threatened their species with extinction. Word of the miracle spread through the cave system. Dragons who had been skeptical of human methods now brought their own problems to Mara for solutions. The small being became their most valued pack member, consulted on everything from nutrition to nesting site selection. But Mara's greatest test was yet to come. As the incubation period entered its final phase, all the eggs began showing signs of imminent hatching. This was the most dangerous time, when young dragons were most vulnerable to complications. In the wild, only about half of all eggs successfully hatched, and fewer still survived their first weeks of life. Mara prepared for this challenge with characteristic thoroughness. The human created specialized hatching chambers with controlled environments, designed emergency protocols for various complications, and even developed new tools for assisting difficult births. The first egg began to crack on a warm morning in late spring. Lisa hovered anxiously as hairline fractures appeared in the perfect white surface, but Mara remained calm and focused. The human had witnessed this process many times now through its monitoring equipment, understanding the stages of dragon birth better than dragons themselves. When the first tiny snout pushed through the shell, followed by a miniature horn and one bright golden eye, the cave erupted in celebration. The hatchling was larger and stronger than any dragon born in living memory, its scales already showing the healthy pearl coloration of their species. One by one, the other eggs followed. Each hatching brought new joy, but also new challenges that Mara met with expertise gained through careful study. The human seemed to anticipate every complication, providing assistance that ensured not just survival, but optimal health for each newborn. By the end of the hatching season, the impossible had happened. Every single egg had produced a healthy hatchling. 23 young dragons filled the cave with their excited chirping, more successful births than the pack had seen in decades, but perhaps more importantly, Mara had taught the dragons how to replicate this success. The methods, the monitoring techniques, the environmental controls, all of it could be passed down to future generations. The human had not just saved their current young, but had given them the knowledge to thrive for centuries to come. As Zareth watched Mara playing with the hatchlings, teaching them simple games and songs in both human and dragon languages, the pack leader realized that their mysterious guest had become something more than a helper or healer. Mara had become family. The 23 hatchlings had been thriving for 2 months when the first ships appeared in Kithara's sky. Mara spotted them first, its keen human eyes picking out the metallic glints against the morning clouds. The reaction was immediate and alarming. Mara's usually calm demeanor shattered, replaced by obvious terror. "Hide," Mara said urgently in broken dragon speech, the first time any of them had heard fear in the human's voice. "Ship's bad, very bad. Must hide young ones." The dragons had never seen their small guardian so frightened. Mara's hands shook as it pointed at the distant vessels, and the human's normally steady voice cracked with emotion. Whatever those ships represented, Mara knew them and feared them deeply. Zareth spread his massive wings, his protective instincts flaring. "What are those ships, Mara? What do they want?" But the human was already moving, gathering the hatchlings with urgent efficiency. Despite its panic, Mara's first concern was for the young dragons, herding them toward the deepest chambers of the cave system. The little ones sensed the adult's fear and huddled close to their human protector, chirping anxiously. Through gestures and fragments of dragon language mixed with human words, Mara managed to convey the basic threat. The ships belonged to Mara's own kind, humans from the Galactic Council. They were searching for something or someone, and that someone was clearly Mara. "You're a fugitive," Nyx realized, her ancient eyes studying the trembling human with new understanding. "That's why you were alone in the snow. You were running from your own people." Mara nodded miserably, tears streaming down its face as it struggled to explain. The story came out in broken pieces, translated through the limited vocabulary they shared. Mara had been a scientist working on projects for the Galactic Council. But something had gone wrong, something involving experimentation on other species, procedures that Mara couldn't accept. The human had stolen information, evidence of illegal experiments, data that could destroy careers and topple governments. When it tried to expose the truth, Mara became a target. The council wanted its former scientist back, along with the stolen data, and they would use any means necessary to retrieve both. "So you crashed here while running from them," Lysa said softly, nuzzling the frightened human with her great snout. "You were already injured and dying when we found you." The revelation explained so much. Mara's advanced medical knowledge, its sophisticated understanding of biology and environmental systems, its ability to solve problems that had stumped dragon wisdom for generations. This wasn't just an unusually intelligent being. This was a scientist whose own people had branded it a traitor for having a conscience. The ships were getting closer, their sensors sweeping the mountain ranges in systematic search patterns. Soon they would detect the heat signatures from the dragon caves, and discovery would be inevitable. "We fight them," Dorn declared, his massive frame bristling with aggression. "They threaten our pack member. We defend our own." Other dragons voiced agreement, their protective instincts aroused, but Mara shook its head frantically, trying to make them understand the hopelessness of resistance. "No fight," the human pleaded. "Ships too strong. Weapons kill all dragons, must hide. Must protect hatchlings." Through urgent explanation, Mara revealed the true scope of the threat. The Galactic Council ships carried advanced weaponry designed to subdue entire planetary populations. A few dragons, no matter how fierce, couldn't stand against technology that could level mountains, but they couldn't hide forever. The ships had orbital sensors that could detect life signs through solid rock. The dragon caves, with their thermal activity and large population, would stand out like beacons once the search reached their sector. "There has to be another way," Zareth insisted. "You saved our young. Now we save you." Mara looked around at the dragons who had become its family, at the hatchlings who depended on it for protection and guidance. For a moment, the human's expression showed a desperate longing to accept their offer of sanctuary, but then reality reasserted itself. "Cannot stay," Mara said quietly. "If caught here, Council punish dragons too. Take hatchlings for experiments. Destroy pack." The words hit the dragons like physical blows. The idea of their precious young being taken by the same forces that had made Mara a fugitive was unbearable. Yet the alternative, losing their human guardian, seemed equally impossible. "What if we could fight them?" Vex suggested. "Not with claws and flames, but with cleverness. You've taught us so much, Mara. Perhaps you could teach us how to outwit these council ships." For the first time since spotting the vessels, hope flickered in Mara's eyes. The human began sketching rapidly in the cave dust, drawing diagrams of ship configurations and sensor arrays. Despite its fear, Mara's scientific mind was already analyzing the problem, looking for weaknesses to exploit. The plan that emerged was audacious and dangerous. The council ships were looking for a single human fugitive, not for evidence of advanced dragon civilization. If they could create a diversion that drew the search away from the dragon territories, Mara might be able to escape while keeping the pack safe. But the diversion would require sacrifices that none of them wanted to make. "The old volcanic caves in the eastern peaks," Nick suggested when she understood the strategy. "They've been abandoned for centuries, but they still show thermal activity. We could make it look like someone was hiding there." The plan required splitting the pack, something they had never done before. Several adult dragons would have to leave their territory, carrying equipment that would simulate human life signs in the distant caves. Meanwhile, Mara would use the distraction to escape in the opposite direction, toward the polar regions where council sensors were less effective. "It could work," Mara admitted reluctantly, "but dangerous for dragons who make diversion. Council ships might attack first, ask questions later. Then we make sure they have reason to be careful," Zareth decided. "We give them a mystery that requires investigation rather than immediate attack." The next few hours were a frenzy of preparation. Mara worked with desperate efficiency, creating devices that would mimic human technology using dragon cave materials. The most crucial was a transmission beacon that would broadcast fragments of scientific data, enough to convince the council that their fugitive scientist was hiding in the eastern caves, not enough to reveal the full extent of Mara's discoveries about dragon biology. As the human worked, the adult dragons made their own preparations. Dorn and 3 others would carry the deception devices to the eastern caves, while Vex and 2 of the swifter flyers would escort Mara toward the polar escape route. The rest of the pack would remain to guard the hatchlings, maintaining absolute silence to avoid detection. The emotional farewells were heartbreaking. The hatchlings didn't understand why their beloved Mara was leaving, chirping anxiously as the human tried to explain through tears. Lysa pressed her forehead against Mara's small form, sharing warmth and comfort one last time. "Come back to us," she whispered. "When it's safe, find your way home." Mara nodded, unable to speak through its grief. The human had found something with the dragon pack that it had never expected: unconditional love and acceptance. Leaving them felt like tearing away pieces of its own heart. As the council ships drew closer to their search pattern, the plan went into motion. Dorn's team launched into the pre-dawn darkness, carrying their precious cargo toward the distant peaks. Their flight paths were carefully planned to avoid detection while still reaching the target zone in time. 30 minutes later, Mara and its escort team departed in the opposite direction. The human rode an especially designed carrier that Vex had crafted, protected from the wind and cold of high-altitude flight. As they soared over the frozen landscape, Mara turned for one last look at the cave system that had become home. Behind them, the council ships continued their methodical search, unaware that their quarry was slipping away into the vast white wilderness of Kythera's polar regions. But Mara knew this was only the beginning. The council would eventually realize they had been deceived, and the hunt would resume with even greater intensity. The question was whether the dragon's sacrifice would buy enough time for Mara to find a permanent solution to their mutual predicament. As they flew toward an uncertain future, both human and dragons carried the same desperate hope: that somehow they would find a way to be together again. 3 months had passed since Mara disappeared into the polar wasteland, and the dragon pack lived in constant anxiety. The council ships had eventually discovered the deception in the eastern caves, but by then the trail had gone cold. They had departed Kythera after 2 weeks of fruitless searching, but everyone knew they would return. The hatchlings had grown significantly during Mara's absence, but they constantly asked for their human guardian. Their first words had been a mixture of dragon speech and human sounds that Mara had taught them, and they still waited each evening for the strange lullabies that only their beloved protector could sing. Zareth spent his days patrolling the skies, hoping for some sign of Mara's return. The pack leader had aged visibly during the separation, the weight of responsibility and worry etching new lines around his eyes. Every distant speck in the sky raised hopes that were inevitably crushed when it proved to be just another ice-bird or wind-carried debris. Then, on a clear winter morning, everything changed. Kale burst into the main cave, his young voice cracking with excitement. "Ships, but not council ships. These are different, smaller, faster, and they're broadcasting a signal." The pack gathered at the cave entrance, staring up at 3 sleek vessels that moved with purposeful precision toward their mountain. These ships were indeed different from the council's massive search cruisers. They were elegant, almost organic in design, and they approached with none of the threatening behavior they had learned to associate with Galactic Council forces. "The signal," Vex said, her keen hearing picking up the transmission patterns. "It's in human language, but the tone, it sounds like Mara." Zareth's heart leaped, but caution held him back. The council was notorious for its deceptions. This could be another trap, a more sophisticated attempt to locate their missing scientist. The lead ship landed in the clearing where they had first found Mara, its systems powering down in a gesture of peaceful intent. The hatch opened and several figures emerged, but they weren't wearing council uniforms. Their clothing was simpler, more practical, and they moved with the careful respect of visitors rather than the arrogance of conquerors. Then Mara appeared in the hatchway, and the cave erupted in joyous roars that echoed across the mountainside. The human looked different, stronger, more confident, wearing clothes that seemed designed for Arctic conditions, but the smile was the same, and the tears that streamed down Mara's face as it saw the assembled dragons were unmistakably genuine. "My family," Mara called out in much improved dragon speech. "I have returned and I have brought friends." The reunion was overwhelming. Dragons who had maintained stoic composure during the separation now wept openly as Mara embraced each of them in turn. The hatchlings, now large enough to be dangerous in their enthusiasm, nearly trampled their human guardian in their eagerness to welcome it home. But even as they celebrated, questions burned in every dragon mind. Who were these new humans? How had Mara survived alone in the polar wilderness? And most importantly, were they truly safe from council persecution? The answers came gradually as Mara introduced its companions. Dr. Elena Vasquez, a former council xenobiologist who had become disillusioned with their methods. Captain James Chen, a transport pilot who had helped several scientists escape from council territory. Dr. Kamal Okafor, a geneticist whose research had been shut down when he refused to weaponize his discoveries. We are the Sanctuary Network, Dr. Vasquez explained in careful, accented dragon speech. She had clearly been learning the language during their journey. Scientists who believe in cooperation rather than exploitation. Mara contacted us 3 months ago with an incredible story about a dragon civilization that had achieved something unprecedented. The story of Mara's escape was remarkable. The human had survived in the polar caves using skills learned from dragon wilderness techniques, but more importantly, it had used the time to contact allies throughout the galaxy. The stolen council data that had made Mara a fugitive turned out to be the key to everything. The information Mara took contained evidence of the council's illegal experiments on dozens of species, Captain Chen explained. When we released it through secure channels, it caused a massive scandal. 3 council members have already been arrested, and their xenobiology programs are under investigation. But the real breakthrough came when Mara shared its discoveries about dragon reproduction and health. The techniques that had saved the pack's hatchlings represented a revolution in interspecies medicine, with applications that could help endangered populations throughout the galaxy. Your dragon pack has achieved something that advanced civilizations thought impossible, Dr. Okafor said, his voice filled with genuine awe. A 100% hatching success rate, complete elimination of genetic disorders, optimized environmental conditions that enhance rather than merely sustain life. This isn't just scientific advancement. It's a miracle. The Sanctuary Network had come to Cathera with a proposition that stunned the dragons. They wanted to establish a research station in partnership with the pack, studying dragon biology and environmental techniques, while sharing advanced technology and medical knowledge. The arrangement would be completely voluntary, with the dragons maintaining full control over their territory and traditions. No more hiding, Mara explained, its eyes bright with excitement. No more fear of council ships. Sanctuary Network has legal protection, treaties with dozens of systems. Under their charter, Cathera becomes protected research preserve. Council cannot touch us here. The implications were staggering. The dragons could maintain their traditional lifestyle while gaining access to advanced medical care, educational opportunities for their young, and protection from future threats. In return, they would share their wisdom about environmental balance and sustainable population management. But perhaps most importantly, they would never again face the heartbreak of losing their young to preventable diseases or environmental damage. The negotiations took weeks as the dragons carefully considered every aspect of the proposed partnership. Nyx proved invaluable during these discussions, her ancient wisdom helping to identify potential problems and suggest solutions. The sanctuary scientists showed remarkable patience and respect for dragon culture, never pushing for quick decisions or dismissing traditional concerns. The breakthrough came when the scientists demonstrated their portable medical scanner, a device that could monitor dragon health at the cellular level. When they used it to examine the hatchlings, the results exceeded everyone's hopes. Incredible, Dr. Vasquez breathed, studying the readings. These young dragons show genetic optimization that should be impossible without advanced intervention. Their immune systems are enhanced, their neural development is accelerated, their physical capabilities exceed baseline dragon parameters by significant margins. Mara beamed with pride as the implications became clear. The techniques developed during those desperate weeks of protecting the eggs hadn't just ensured survival. They had actually improved the hatchlings' natural capabilities. The young dragons were smarter, stronger, and healthier than any generation in their species' history. Think what we could accomplish working together, Dr. Okafor said earnestly. Dragon wisdom combined with human technology, traditional knowledge enhanced by scientific methodology. We could solve problems that have plagued dozens of worlds. The formal agreement was signed during the spring equinox, with ceremonies that blended dragon traditions with sanctuary network protocols. The research station would be built in a distant valley, far enough from the main caves to ensure privacy, but close enough for easy collaboration. Most importantly, Mara would remain with the pack permanently, serving as both liaison and family member. The human had found its true calling in the intersection between species, helping different forms of life understand and support each other. As Zareth watched the celebration that followed the signing ceremony, he marveled at how dramatically their world had changed. A year ago, they had been a dying species, mourning their lost future and slowly fading into extinction. Now they were partners in a galactic network, their young thriving beyond all expectations, their knowledge valued throughout the civilized worlds. The transformation had begun with a single act of compassion, rescuing a dying stranger from the snow. That small gesture had saved not just one life, but an entire species. The ancient stories speak of great changes coming with the arrival of special visitors, Nyx observed, settling beside the pack leader as they watched Mara teaching the hatchlings a new song that combined dragon harmonies with human melodies. "Do you think the stories predicted this?" Zareth asked. The ancient dragon smiled, her eyes twinkling with deep contentment. "I think the stories knew what we had forgotten, that the greatest strength comes not from standing alone, but from choosing to help each other." As night fell over Kythera, the combined voices of dragons and humans rose in celebration, their song carrying across the mountains like a promise of hope for the future. 5 years had transformed Kythera into something that would have seemed impossible during those dark months of mourning. The Sanctuary Research Station hummed with activity in the Eastern Valley, its biodome laboratories and communication arrays creating a bridge between dragon wisdom and galactic science. But the real changes were harder to quantify and far more profound. The Dragon Pack had grown from 12 adults and 23 hatchlings to a thriving community of over 200 individuals. Word of their success had spread to other dragon populations throughout the sector, and many had made the journey to Kythera seeking the knowledge that could save their own declining species. Mara, now fluent in 17 different dragon dialects and 3 off-world languages, served as coordinator for what had become known as the Kythera Protocols, a comprehensive system for managing endangered species recovery that was being implemented on dozens of worlds. The morning census shows 43 new eggs in the eastern nesting. "Complex," reported Zara, one of the original hatchlings who had grown into a capable young adult. Her scales bore the enhanced coloration that marked all of Mara's generation, a subtle iridescence that seemed to shift with her emotions. Mara nodded approvingly, making notes on a tablet that seamlessly integrated human technology with dragon-carved interfaces. Temperature regulation is optimal, and the air filtration systems are operating at peak efficiency. Dr. Vasquez's latest atmospheric adjustments have improved incubation success rates by another 2%. The collaboration between species had evolved far beyond the original emergency measures. Dragon environmental instincts combined with human scientific methodology had created innovations that neither species could have achieved alone. The thermal regulation systems now in use throughout the galaxy bore little resemblance to either traditional dragon nesting practices or standard human environmental controls. Mara, called Kale, now serving as the pack's primary liaison with visiting dragons. The delegation from the Proxima colonies has arrived. They're requesting a demonstration of the genetic screening techniques. The human-dragon partnership had become so successful that they regularly hosted delegations from across the galaxy. The Kythera model was being studied, adapted, and implemented by dozens of different species, each finding ways to apply the core principles to their own unique challenges. As Mara prepared for the demonstration, it reflected on how dramatically its life had changed since that desperate flight from Council forces. The stolen data that had made it a fugitive was now part of the public record, having led to the largest reform movement in Galactic Council history. 3 entire departments had been disbanded, dozens of illegal research programs had been shut down, and new protocols ensured that interspecies cooperation would be voluntary rather than exploitative. The demonstration took place in the main laboratory complex, where visiting scientists could observe the dragon reproduction process without disturbing the natural behaviors of the pack. Mara moved confidently among the monitoring equipment, explaining how each system contributed to the overall success of their program. The key insight, Mara explained to the assembled delegates, was understanding that optimal conditions aren't the same as natural conditions. Dragons evolved under survival pressures that are no longer necessary. By creating better environments than nature provides, we allow genetic potential to flourish. Dr. Vasquez, now permanently stationed on Kythera and speaking fluent dragon, added technical details about the biochemical processes involved. The partnership between human science and dragon wisdom had produced breakthroughs that neither could have achieved alone. But the real test came when Zareth arrived with news that sent ripples of excitement through the gathering. The deep space monitors have detected the approach of a council. Investigative fleet, the pack leader announced. Not the enforcement ships we once feared, but research vessels requesting permission to study our methods. The transformation was complete. The same galactic council that had once hunted Mara as a fugitive now sought to learn from the revolutionary techniques that partnership had created. The illegal experiments and forced studies had been replaced by respectful collaboration and voluntary knowledge sharing. As the visiting delegations prepared for the council arrival, Mara found itself drawn to the original nesting chamber, where it had first worked to save the dragon eggs. The space had been preserved as a monument to their early efforts. Though it now seemed primitive compared to the sophisticated facilities they had developed, Lisa found the human there, standing quietly among the memorial crystals that honored their lost first clutch. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked gently. "Giving up your old life to stay with us?" Mara considered the question seriously. Its former existence as a council scientist seemed like someone else's life now. The sterile laboratories, the competitive research environment, the constant pressure to produce results regardless of ethical implications. All of it felt foreign and unwelcoming compared to the warm community it had found among the dragons. "I gave up a career," Mara said finally, "but I gained a family, and together we created something neither of us could have imagined alone." The memorial chamber now held new additions, eggs from each successful clutch, representing the hundreds of dragons who owed their lives to the partnership between species. But more than that, it represented hope itself, the proof that different forms of life could not just coexist but thrive together. A soft chiming from Mara's communicator indicated that the council fleet had entered the outer system. In a few hours, representatives from the same organization that had once branded it a fugitive would arrive seeking its expertise and guidance. "Are you nervous?" Lisa asked, sensing the human's mixed emotions. "Excited," Mara replied, surprising itself with the realization. "We've proven that cooperation works better than exploitation. Now we get to teach that lesson to the people who most need to learn it." The arrival ceremony took place in the main valley, with dragons and humans working together to welcome the council delegation. The contrast with previous council visits was striking. Where once there had been armed ships and threatening demands, now there were diplomatic vessels and formal requests for cooperation. Admiral Sarah Chen, the fleet commander and Captain Chen's sister, emerged from the lead ship with an expression of genuine awe as she took in the bustling community that had grown around the research station. "Dr. Mara Okoye," she said formally, using the human's full name for the first time in years. "The Galactic Council extends its official apologies for past actions and formally requests to participate in the Kythera Protocols Research Initiative." The ceremony that followed was broadcast throughout the galaxy, marking the formal end of the old exploitative research model and the beginning of a new era of interspecies collaboration. But for Mara, the most meaningful moment came when the youngest hatchlings performed. A welcome song that seamlessly blended dragon harmonies with human melodies. These young dragons had never known a world where different species didn't work together. To them, the sight of humans and dragons collaborating was as natural as breathing. They represented the future that Mara and the pack had fought to create, a generation that would never have to choose between their identity and their principles. As the evening celebration continued, Mara slipped away to a quiet overlook where it could see both the dragon caves and the research station. The lights from both communities twinkled in the darkness, creating a constellation of hope on the surface of a world that had once seemed doomed. Zareth joined the human at the overlook, his massive presence comforting and familiar. "The hatchlings are asking when you'll tell them the story again," he said with amusement. The one about the small human who fell from the sky and taught dragons how to dream of impossible things. Mara smiled, remembering how that story had evolved over the years. What had begun as a desperate survival tale had become a legend of transformation, told not just to dragon young, but to children of dozens of species throughout the galaxy. Tomorrow, Mara promised, and maybe this time we'll add a new chapter about how dreams can become reality when different peoples choose to trust each other. Below them, the lights of Kythera continued to shine, a beacon of hope in a galaxy learning to replace fear with friendship, exploitation with cooperation, and despair with the boundless possibilities that emerged when different forms of life chose to care for each other. The human who had once fled through the snow as a fugitive now stood as a bridge between worlds, surrounded by the family that had saved its life and the community that had grown from their shared faith in a better future. The morning songs that had once filled the dragon caves had been replaced by lullabies of hope, sung in harmonies that no single species could have created alone. In the end, Mara reflected, the greatest discoveries weren't made in laboratories or recorded in scientific journals. They were found in the simple act of choosing compassion over suspicion, cooperation over competition, and love over fear. Those discoveries had the power to transform not just individual lives, but entire civilizations. 5 years had transformed Kythera into something that would have seemed impossible during those dark months of mourning. The Sanctuary Research Station hummed with activity in the Eastern Valley, its biodome laboratories and communication arrays creating a bridge between dragon wisdom and galactic science. But the real changes were harder to quantify and far more profound. The Dragon Pack had grown from 12 adults and 23 hatchlings to a thriving community of over 200 individuals. Word of their success had spread to other dragon populations throughout the sector, and many had made the journey to Kythera seeking the knowledge that could save their own declining species. Mara, now fluent in 17 different dragon dialects and 3 off-world languages, served as coordinator for what had become known as the Kythera Protocols, a comprehensive system for managing endangered species recovery that was being implemented on dozens of worlds. The morning census shows 43 new eggs in the eastern nesting complex, reported Zara, one of the original hatchlings who had grown into a capable young adult. Her scales bore the enhanced coloration that marked all of Mara's generation, a subtle iridescence that seemed to shift with her emotions. Mara nodded approvingly, making notes on a tablet that seamlessly integrated human technology with dragon-carved interfaces. Temperature regulation is optimal, and the air filtration systems are operating at peak efficiency. Dr. Vasquez's latest atmospheric adjustments have improved incubation success rates by another 2%. The collaboration between species had evolved far beyond the original emergency measures. Dragon environmental instincts combined with human scientific methodology had created innovations that neither species could have achieved alone. The thermal regulation systems now in use throughout the galaxy bore little resemblance to either traditional dragon nesting practices or standard human environmental controls. Mara, called Kale, now serving as the pack's primary liaison with visiting dragons. The delegation from the Proxima colonies has arrived. They're requesting a demonstration of the genetic screening techniques. The human-dragon partnership had become so successful that they regularly hosted delegations from across the galaxy. The Kythera model was being studied, adapted, and implemented by dozens of different species, each finding ways to apply the core principles to their own unique challenges. As Mara prepared for the demonstration, it reflected on how dramatically its life had changed since that desperate flight from Council forces. The stolen data that had made it a fugitive was now part of the public record, having led to the largest reform movement in Galactic Council history. 3 entire departments had been disbanded, dozens of illegal research programs had been shut down, and new protocols ensured that interspecies cooperation would be voluntary rather than exploitative. The demonstration took place in the main laboratory complex, where visiting scientists could observe the dragon reproduction process without disturbing the natural behaviors of the pack. Mara moved confidently among the monitoring equipment, explaining how each system contributed to the overall success of their program. The key insight, Mara explained to the assembled delegates, was understanding that optimal conditions aren't the same as natural conditions. Dragons evolved under survival pressures that are no longer necessary. By creating better environments than nature provides, we allow genetic potential to flourish, Dr. Vasquez, now permanently stationed on Kythera and speaking fluent dragon, added technical details about the biochemical processes involved. The partnership between human science and dragon wisdom had produced breakthroughs that neither could have achieved alone. But the real test came when Zareth arrived with news that sent ripples of excitement through the gathering. The deep space monitors have detected the approach of a council. Investigative fleet, the pack leader announced. Not the enforcement ships we once feared, but research vessels requesting permission to study our methods. The transformation was complete. The same galactic council that had once hunted Mara as a fugitive now sought to learn from the revolutionary techniques that partnership had created. The illegal experiments and forced studies had been replaced by respectful collaboration and voluntary knowledge sharing. As the visiting delegations prepared for the council arrival, Mara found itself drawn to the original nesting chamber where it had first worked to save the dragon eggs. The space had been preserved as a monument to their early efforts, though it now seemed primitive compared to the sophisticated facilities they had developed. Lisa found the human there, standing quietly among the memorial crystals that honored their lost first clutch. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked gently.
"Giving up your old life to stay with us?"
Mara considered the question seriously. Its former existence as a council scientist seemed like someone else's life now. The sterile laboratories, the competitive research environment, the constant pressure to produce results regardless of ethical implications. All of it felt foreign and unwelcoming compared to the warm community it had found among the dragons. "I gave up a career," Mara said finally, "but I gained a family, and together we created something neither of us could have imagined alone." The memorial chamber now held new additions, eggs from each successful clutch, representing the hundreds of dragons who owed their lives to the partnership between species. But more than that, it represented hope itself, the proof that different forms of life could not just coexist but thrive together. A soft chiming from Mara's communicator indicated that the council fleet had entered the outer system. In a few hours, representatives from the same organization that had once branded it a fugitive would arrive seeking its expertise and guidance. "Are you nervous?" Lysa asked, sensing the human's mixed emotions. "Excited," Mara replied, surprising itself with the realization. "We've proven that cooperation works better than exploitation. Now we get to teach that lesson to the people who most need to learn it." The arrival ceremony took place in the main valley, with dragons and humans working together to welcome the council delegation. The contrast with previous council visits was striking. Where once there had been armed ships and threatening demands, now there were diplomatic vessels and formal requests for cooperation. Admiral Sarah Chen, the fleet commander and Captain Chen's sister, emerged from the lead ship with an expression of genuine awe as she took in the bustling community that had grown around the research station. "Dr. Mara Okoye," she said formally, using the human's full name for the first time in years. "The Galactic Council extends its official apologies for past actions and formally requests to participate in the Kythera Protocols Research Initiative, the BAI." Ceremony that followed was broadcast throughout the galaxy, marking the formal end of the old exploitative research model and the beginning of a new era of interspecies collaboration. But for Mara, the most meaningful moment came when the youngest hatchlings performed a welcome song that seamlessly blended dragon harmonies with human melodies. These young dragons had never known a world where different species didn't work together. To them, the sight of humans and dragons collaborating was as natural as breathing. They represented the future that Mara and the pack had fought to create, a generation that would never have to choose between their identity and their principles. As the evening celebration continued, Mara slipped away to a quiet overlook where it could see both the dragon caves and the research station. The lights from both communities twinkled in the darkness, creating a constellation of hope on the surface of a world that had once seemed doomed. Zareth joined the human at the overlook, his massive presence comforting and familiar. "The hatchlings are asking when you'll tell them the story again," he said with amusement. "The one about the small human who fell from the sky and taught dragons how to dream of impossible things." Mara smiled, remembering how that story had evolved over the years. What had begun as a desperate survival tale had become a legend of transformation. told not just to dragon young but to children of dozens of species throughout the galaxy. Tomorrow, Mara promised, and maybe this time, we'll add a new chapter about how dreams can become reality when different peoples choose to trust each other. Below them, the lights of Kythera continued to shine, a beacon of hope in a galaxy learning to replace fear with friendship, exploitation with cooperation, and despair with the boundless possibilities that emerged when different forms of life chose to care for each other. The human who had once fled through the snow as a fugitive now stood as a bridge between worlds, surrounded by the family that had saved its life and the community that had grown from their shared faith in a better future. The morning songs that had once filled the dragon caves had been replaced by lullabies of hope, sung in harmonies that no single species could have created alone. In the end, Mara reflected, the greatest discoveries weren't made in laboratories or recorded in scientific journals. They were found in the simple act of choosing compassion over suspicion, cooperation over competition, and love over fear. Those discoveries had the power to transform not just individual lives, but entire civilizations.